Amidst the group, he easily spotted her, her silver gown shimmering with every movement. She was standing beside Steve, his best friend and confidant since their college days. Dylan's smile faltered as he watched them converse, their heads close, their discussion lively. Elena laughed, her hand brushing lightly against Steve's arm. It wasn't anything overtly concerning, but something in their body language made Dylan uneasy, a feeling he quickly dismissed. Still, his curiosity took hold, prompting him to approach them. He moved through the crowd, exchanging polite nods with guests and making his way toward them. Stopping behind a tall flower arrangement, he paused when he overheard Elena's voice, low and intimate. "Can you believe he still thinks those kids are his?" she whispered playfully, conspiratorially. Dylan frowned, leaning in a little closer to hear, careful not to draw attention. Steve laughed softly, his tone equally quiet. "He's practically raised your family for you. With all the money he's put into their private schools and vacations, we couldn't have done it better ourselves." The words struck Dylan like a blow to the chest. He felt the air rush out of him as his chest tightened. Elena tilted her head, smiling slyly. "I know, right? And he's so clueless. It's almost endearing." Before Dylan could fully process the betrayal, Ivy, his eldest daughter, joined them, holding a glass of champagne. She glanced over her shoulder to ensure no one was close enough to overhear. "Yeah, Uncle Steve is way more fun than our loser dad," she smirked. Dylan nearly collapsed. The daughter he had adored, coached soccer games for, and walked to school every day, thought this of him. His mind spun as the cruel words echoed in his head, the weight of it nearly breaking him. But his instincts kicked in, and he backed away, retreating into the crowd with deliberate steps. His face remained neutral as he moved through the room, his body on autopilot. He needed to leave, not just the ballroom, but this entire life, this illusion of a family he had dedicated himself to for decades. Reaching the center of the room, he glanced at the stage and noticed the microphone. For a brief moment, he hesitated. Was he really about to do this? Then the part of him that had just had his world shattered took over, and he approached the microphone. He tapped it lightly to get everyone's attention, and a hush fell over the crowd. All eyes turned to him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate our 25 years of marriage. Unfortunately, the evening is coming to a close due to unforeseen circumstances. The party is over. Please make your way home." A wave of confusion rippled through the crowd, and murmurs spread as guests exchanged puzzled looks. Alana, still standing with Steve and Ivy, froze mid-laugh, her eyes widening as she absorbed Dylan's tone. "Dylan!" she called out, stepping toward him. "What's going on?" He didn't respond. He set the microphone down and walked past her, his expression unreadable. She reached for his arm, but he shrugged her off, his movement firm but controlled. "Dylan, wait!" Elena called, but he was already walking out the door. Dylan drove home in silence, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly, his knuckles turned white. The evening's events replayed in his mind, each word cutting deeper than the last. By the time he reached home, his decision was made. He spent the night in his study, poring over financial documents, account statements, and the prenuptial agreement he and Alana had signed years ago. He worked with methodical precision, fueled by a cold, determined anger. By dawn, everything was set. The next morning, Alana found him in the kitchen, sipping coffee as if nothing had happened. She hesitated in the doorway, her face pale. "Dylan," she began cautiously, "can we talk about last night? What happened? Why did you end the party?" He placed his mug down slowly and looked at her, silent for a moment. He said nothing, letting the silence stretch until she fidgeted uncomfortably. "What happened?" she asked again. Finally, Dylan spoke, his voice calm but cutting. "I heard everything, Elena. Every single word." Her face drained of color. I don't know what you mean." "Don't lie to me," he snapped, his voice rising for the first time. "I heard you. I heard Steve. I heard Ivy. After 25 years of marriage, you humiliated me behind my back. You let me believe those kids were mine while you played house with my best friend." Alana opened and closed her mouth, but no words came out. "Don't you dare deny it," Dylan continued, his tone hard. "You've had your fun, Alana. Now it's my turn. What are you talking about? She whispered, tears filling her eyes. You'll find out soon enough, he replied, grabbing his coat. I'll be in touch through my lawyer. Dylan, wait, she cried, reaching for him. Please don't do this. Let's talk. We can fix this. He paused at the door and looked back at her with a mixture of pity and disdain. You don't fix 25 years of lies, Ilana. You destroy them. And with that, he was gone. By midday, Dylan was seated in his lawyer's office, a folder of documents spread out before him. So, you're absolutely sure about this? The lawyer asked, adjusting his glasses. Absolutely, Dylan replied. I want the divorce papers filed immediately. I also want to amend my will. None of the children will receive a single cent. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. That's a big step, Dylan. Are you sure you don't want to? I'm sure, Dylan interrupted. They're not mine. They never were. The lawyer nodded, scribbling down notes. Understood. And as for your assets? Liquidate everything, Dylan said. The house, the cars, the investments. Sell it all. I want the funds transferred to a private account under my new identity. The lawyer leaned back in his chair, clearly impressed by Dylan's resolve. You've been planning this for a while. No, Dylan said, his voice flat. Just overnight. That evening, Dylan packed a single suitcase. He moved through the house silently, ignoring the family photos on the walls and the echoes of laughter that now felt like a cruel joke. As he stepped out the front door, he glanced back one last time. Ilana was standing in the doorway, her face streaked with tears. Please, Dylan, she begged. Don't leave like this. We need you. The kids need you. He looked at her, his face unreadable. You needed me 25 years ago, he said. But now, you need Steve. Go to him. And with that, he disappeared into the night. Ilana sat in the living room, her hands trembling as she held a half-empty glass of wine. The late afternoon sun streamed through the large windows, casting long shadows across the room. It was eerily quiet, a sharp contrast to the celebration that had once filled their home. The kids sat scattered around, their faces filled with confusion and anger. Ivy, the oldest, was the first to speak. Mom, seriously, what's going on? Dad canceled the party, and now he's just gone. What did you do? Ilana glanced at her, startled. What do you mean? What did I do? She replied. I don't know why he left. Her voice cracked as she tried to sound confident, but the doubt in her words betrayed her. Michael, the middle child, crossed his arms and leaned back against the couch. Dad doesn't just vanish. He's never done anything like this before. Did you have a fight? Did something happen at the party? Elena hesitated, her mind racing. She hadn't told them what Dylan might have overheard. How could she? The truth would destroy them. Or more accurately, it would destroy her image in their eyes. I think he's just stressed, she said finally, avoiding eye contact. He's probably just taking some time to clear his head. He'll come back. Ivy narrowed her eyes. Taking time? Mom, that doesn't explain why his car's gone, why his phone's off, or why his closet is half empty. Don't lie to us. Before Ilana could respond, the front door opened and Steve walked in, carrying a bottle of wine and a grocery bag. He looked around the tense room and raised an eyebrow. What's with the long faces? Michael shot him an annoyed look. Dad's gone. Nobody knows where he is. Steve glanced at Ilana, his expression faltering briefly before he forced a smile. Your dad's probably just taking a break. You know how he gets sometimes. He's always been a bit of a workaholic. He set the bag on the kitchen counter and walked over to Elena, placing a hand on her shoulder. We'll figure this out. Elena flinched slightly but nodded. Yes, of course. He just needs some time. Ivy jumped to her feet, her face flushed with anger. So that's your answer? You both sound completely absurd, she snapped. This isn't some midlife crisis. Something happened, and neither of you is telling us the truth. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Steve sighed, sitting down next to Elena. They'll calm down. Just give them some time, he said. Elena gazed into her glass, her voice barely audible. What if he never comes back, Steve? What if he knows? Steve's usual calm demeanor faltered for a moment, and he shifted uncomfortably. "Even if he does, we'll handle it together," he said, trying to sound confident, but his own uncertainty was clear. Days went by, and the initial shock of Dylan's disappearance began to evolve into something far more concerning. One morning, Elena received a call from the family's financial advisor. "Elena," the advisor said, his voice grim, "I've been trying to contact Dylan, but his accounts have been shut down. All joint accounts with you have been emptied. Every asset tied to him has either been liquidated or moved." Ilona felt her heart drop. "What? That's impossible. He couldn't just take everything." "I'm sorry," the advisor replied, "but it appears he planned this out carefully. There's nothing left in his name." Ilona hung up the phone, her hands shaking. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, overwhelmed by the realization that Dylan had dismantled their entire life overnight, and she hadn't seen it coming. Rushing downstairs, she found Steve sitting at the kitchen table sipping coffee. "He took everything," she blurted out. Steve looked up, frowning. "What do you mean?" Elena explained. "I just spoke to the advisor. The accounts are empty. He sold the stocks, the properties, everything. He left us with nothing." Steve leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. "Damn it, Dylan," he muttered as he stood and started pacing. Okay, don't panic. We'll figure this out." Elena grabbed his arm, her voice rising with panic. "How, Steve? How are we supposed to figure this out? Do you have any idea what this means? The mortgage, the bills, the kids' tuition? We can't afford any of it without him." Steve pulled his arm away, rubbing his temples. "Calm down. We'll think of something. Maybe I can get a loan." "A loan?" Elena snapped, her voice shaking with frustration. "We're drowning, Steve. Do you have any idea how much we owe every month?" Their argument was interrupted by Ivy, who appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "So, he took the money too? Great. What else are you hiding, Mom?" Ilona turned to her daughter, her face crumbling. "Ivy, please, I'm trying to figure this out." Ivy shook her head, her voice dripping with disgust. "You know something you're not telling us. The whole story. I don't know what you and Uncle Steve are up to, but this is all your fault." Ilona gasped, shocked. "How can you say that?" Ivy shouted, "It's obvious. Dad never would have done this unless you gave him a reason. And Uncle Steve being here all the time? It's weird. Don't act like we're stupid." Elena opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Steve stepped forward, his voice stern. "That's enough, Ivy. Your mom is under a lot of stress, and your accusations aren't helping." Ivy shot him a furious glare. "You're not my dad, so don't act like you have any authority here," she spat, before turning and storming off, leaving Alana and Steve in heavy silence. The following weeks only worsened the situation. Bills piled up, creditors called more often, and the once grand mansion began to feel more like a prison. The tension in the house was palpable. The children barely spoke to Elena, and when they did, their words were laced with barely concealed resentment. One morning, Elena received a letter from the bank. She sat at the kitchen table, trembling as she read it aloud. "The house is going into foreclosure," she said hollowly. Steve, who had been scrolling through his phone, looked up sharply. "What?" "They're taking the house," Elena repeated, her voice weak. "We have 30 days to vacate." Steve cursed under his breath. "This can't be happening." Elena looked at him, desperation filling her eyes. "You said we'd figure this out. What am I supposed to do, Steve? Where are we supposed to go?" Steve didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood up and grabbed his jacket. "I need some air." Ilana watched him walk out the door, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on her. Dylan's betrayal, the children's anger, and the impending loss of their home. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. By the end of the month, the house was emptied. Movers took away furniture and boxes as Elena stood on the front lawn, watching her life be dismantled piece by piece. The kids refused to help, staying out of sight as Elena and Steve oversaw the process. When the last truck pulled away, Elena turned to Steve. "Where do we go now?" she asked, her voice raw. Steve hesitated, then spoke slowly. I've been thinking, maybe it's best if we go our separate ways. Elena stared at him, stunned. What? You're leaving me? Steve avoided her gaze. Elena, I can't fix this. I don't have the resources, and honestly, this isn't what I signed up for. Elena's knees buckled and she grabbed his arm. You can't just walk away, Steve. You promised. I didn't promise anything, he interrupted, pulling away. I'm sorry, Alana. You'll figure it out. Without another word, he walked to his car and drove off, leaving her alone. That night, Alana sat in a cheap motel room with her children. The silence between them was thick and suffocating. Finally, Ivy broke it. Is this what you wanted, Mom? She asked bitterly. You ruined everything. Elena didn't respond. She stared out the window, her mind replaying every decision, every lie. Dylan was gone, Steve had left her, and her children hated her. For the first time, she understood the full extent of what she had lost. The sound of waves crashing against the shore was Dylan's constant companion as he stood on a wooden dock, hauling in fishing nets he had set out the night before. The salty breeze brushed against his face, and the rising sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink. For the first time in years, Dylan felt a sense of peace, something he thought he would never find again. The small seaside town of Harbor's Edge had become his sanctuary. Nestled between rolling hills and the vast ocean, it was a place where no one asked questions and everyone minded their own business. Dylan had arrived there 5 years ago, under a new name, Jack Miller, and with a lifetime of scars. He had changed his appearance, shorter hair, a neatly trimmed beard, and a leaner build from years of manual labor. His former life as a successful businessman was now nothing more than a distant memory. One evening, as the sun set behind the horizon, Dylan walked through the bustling town market. The smells of freshly baked bread and grilled seafood filled the air. Vendors called out to passers-by, advertising their goods. Vibrant fruits, handmade jewelry, and artisanal crafts. Dylan enjoyed these quiet evenings, blending in with the crowd and finding comfort in the anonymity that small-town life provided. He stopped at a stall selling. A handcrafted vase caught Dylan's attention as he browsed the market. Its soft blue glaze reminded him of the calm ocean, the subtle waves reflecting the sky. As he reached out to touch it, his hand brushed against someone else's. Oh, I'm sorry, a gentle voice apologized. Dylan turned to see a woman standing next to him. Her auburn hair was tied loosely in a braid, and her warm hazel eyes sparkled as she offered him a small apologetic smile. No need to apologize, Dylan replied, his voice calm and pleasant. It's a beautiful piece, isn't it? She nodded, admiring the vase. It's simple but elegant. I always enjoy the craftsmanship at these markets. Dylan tilted his head slightly, intrigued. You sound like you know a thing or two about art, he remarked. The woman chuckled softly. Not really, but I used to paint when I was younger. It's been a while since I've had the time or inspiration, she said, a hint of sadness in her voice. Dylan noticed a quiet story behind her words, an unspoken history. Sometimes it just takes the right moment to start again, he said, surprising himself with the wisdom in his tone. The woman extended her hand. I'm Lainey, by the way. Jack, Dylan replied, shaking her hand. The name still felt unfamiliar, but he was getting used to it. They continued their conversation, walking from one stall to another. Lainey shared stories of her life. She had moved to Harbor's Edge 3 years earlier after a difficult divorce and now ran a small bookstore in town. She spent her free time volunteering at the community center. What about you? Lainey asked as they strolled down the cobblestone streets. What brought you to Harbor's Edge? Dylan hesitated for a moment, his mind racing. He had always been cautious about revealing too much of his past. I needed a change, he said simply. City life wasn't for me anymore. Lainey seemed to sense his reluctance and didn't press him further. Well, whatever brought you here, I'm glad it did. It's nice to meet someone new. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed more frequently. Dylan found himself lingering at Lainey's bookstore, not just for her company, but also for the peaceful atmosphere of the shop. Shelves filled with books of every genre, surrounded a small seating area where customers could sip coffee and read. One afternoon, as Dylan flipped through a collection of old classics, Lainey approached him, holding a cup of coffee. "On the house," she said with a smile. "You've been my most loyal customer lately." Dylan chuckled. "I think I've read more this past month than I did in the last 10 years. Lainey leaned against the counter, watching him. "You're a bit of a mystery, Jack. Quiet, reserved, but there's something about you. Like you care a lot more than you let on." Dylan met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "We all have our baggage," he replied after a pause. "Some of us just pack it better." Lainey didn't press him further, but her eyes softened. "Well, if you ever want to unpack it, I'm a good listener." Dylan nodded, grateful for her understanding. "Thank you." As the months went by, their bond grew stronger. Lainey's kindness and warmth slowly chipped away at the walls Dylan had built around himself. She never pried into his past, respecting his need for privacy. In return, he found himself opening up little by little. He told her about his love for the ocean, his passion for fishing, and his appreciation for the simple things in life. One evening, as they walked along the beach, Lainey opened up more about her own past. "My ex-husband was difficult," she began, choosing her words carefully. "He was controlling, manipulative. By the time I realized how toxic our relationship was, I had lost so much of myself. It took everything I had to leave." Dylan listened quietly, his heart aching for her. "It takes a lot of strength to walk away," he said. "You should be proud of that." Lainey smiled faintly. "Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever really heal, if I'll ever trust again." Dylan stopped walking and turned to face her. "You will. It just takes time, and the right people." Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the unspoken understanding between them was clear. Both carried wounds from their pasts, but in each other, they found comfort. As Dylan's relationship with Lainey blossomed, so did his life in Harbor's Edge. He became a familiar face in the community, helping out at the docks, volunteering at the local food pantry, and even teaching kids how to fish. The townspeople admired his quiet generosity and steady reliability, though none of them knew the full extent of his past. One evening, after a community event at the town square, Lainey invited Dylan to her home for dinner. Her small cottage was cozy and inviting, filled with books, plants, and personal touches that reflected her vibrant personality. As they sat down to share a homemade meal, Lainey's tone shifted. "Jack," she began, her voice uncertain, "I need to ask you something." Dylan tensed slightly but nodded, signaling her to go ahead. "Do you ever think about going back to wherever you came from? To whoever you left behind?" The question hung heavily in the air, carrying more weight than it seemed at first. Dylan set his fork down, his face unreadable. "No," he said finally. "There's nothing left for me there. My life is here now." Lainey reached across the table and gently placed her hand over his. "I just want you to know that whatever happened in your past, it doesn't define you. You're a good man, Jack, and you deserve to be happy." Dylan looked at her, his chest tightening. For years, he had carried the weight of betrayal and anger, believing he would never move past it. But here, with Lainey, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means more than you know." As the evening continued, Dylan realized that for the first time since his world had fallen apart, he was beginning to feel whole again. Though the shadows of his past still loomed, he knew he was finally on the path to healing. Meanwhile, the city skyline loomed cold and unwelcoming as Ilona stared out the window of her modest, worn-down apartment. The once luxurious penthouse she had called home was now a distant memory, replaced by peeling wallpaper and the constant drip of a leaky faucet. The sharp contrast between her past and present served as a daily reminder of everything she had lost. Elena sat at the small kitchen table, her head in her hands. A pile of overdue bills sat before her. The utilities were behind, and the landlord's warnings had become ultimatums. Her reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink caught her eye. She hardly recognized herself. Her once glossy hair was now dull, and her face was gaunt, lined with the stress of her situation. Her phone buzzed, and for a fleeting moment, hope stirred within her. Maybe it was Dylan. Maybe after all these years, he would answer her messages. But the screen only displayed another notice from a debt collector. She tossed the phone onto the table and let out a bitter laugh. The betrayal had cost Elena everything. Steve, once her partner in deception, and the man she had foolishly trusted, had disappeared a year after Dylan's vanishing. When the money ran out, so did Steve's affection. "Elena, I can't keep doing this," Steve had said during their last argument, his voice filled with impatience as he packed his things. "You're a mess. You're dragging me down. You promised me," Ilana screamed, her voice cracking. "You said we'd get through this together." Steve didn't even glance at her. "I made promises when I thought there'd still be something left for us," he said coldly. "You can't blame me for wanting out." He slammed the door as he left, leaving Ilana standing in the center of their empty apartment. That was the last time she saw him. The children, no, they weren't children anymore, resented her with every fiber of their being. Taylor, the oldest, had been the first to leave. "I can't even look at you, Mom," Taylor had spat during one of their many arguments. "You ruined everything. You destroyed Dad, and you destroyed us." Ilana had tried to explain herself, reaching out in desperation. "I made mistakes, Taylor, but I did it for us. For us." Taylor's laugh was sharp and cold. "No, you did it for yourself. You lied to Dad, cheated on him, and dragged us into this mess. I don't want anything to do with you." And with that, Taylor walked out, leaving Elena sobbing on the floor. The other two children, Ethan and Chloe, stayed a little longer but grew more distant. Their resentment simmered just beneath the surface, erupting in heated arguments. "Do you even feel bad for what you did to Dad?" Chloe shouted one evening. "Do you even care that you lied to him our entire lives?" Elena's voice cracked as she tried to defend herself. "Of course I care. I made mistakes, but I loved him." "Loved him?" Chloe's voice shook with anger. "You humiliated him. You lied about everything, and now we have nothing because of you." Ethan, usually the quieter one, had chimed in. "Do you even know where Dad is? Have you even tried to fix this?" Ilana looked at them helplessly. "I've tried. He won't answer my messages. I've called, written letters, everything. Maybe he's better off without us." Ethan muttered before leaving the room. "Maybe." Elena sat alone once again, her heart sinking. She relentlessly searched for Dylan, but it seemed like he had vanished without a trace. Private investigators found nothing. Every email she sent went unanswered. Every voicemail she left was met with silence. One evening, after months of failed attempts, she sat on her bed, clutching her phone. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she typed yet another message. "Dylan, please. I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but the kids, they need you. I need you. Please just tell me you're okay." She pressed send, but deep down, she knew it would go unanswered, just like the others. The weight of her guilt grew unbearable, and she turned to alcohol. It started with one glass of wine, but soon it spiraled. Empty bottles scattered across the apartment were a clear sign of her unraveling life. Nights blended together, and Ilana lost track of time. One morning, Chloe stormed into the apartment, her face filled with disgust. "Are you seriously drunk right now?" she demanded, snatching the bottle from Elena's hands. "It's 10 a.m., Mom." Elena slurred. "What does it matter? No one cares anyway." Chloe shook her head, her voice laced with disbelief. "You're pathetic. You're not even trying to fix this," Elena snapped, tears streaming down her face. "What do you want me to do?" "I've lost everything. Your father won't even talk to me. Steve's gone. You and your brother hate me. What do you want from me?" "I wanted a mother who didn't destroy our family," Chloe said coldly before slamming the door behind her. The children began to distance themselves entirely. Taylor moved out of state, cutting off all communication. Chloe found a job and rarely returned home, while Ethan dropped out of college, staying only out of necessity. The tension in the apartment was suffocating, and the few conversations they had devolved into arguments. One evening, as Elena sat alone in the dimly lit apartment, the sound of her phone ringing jolted her from her stupor. She scrambled to answer, her heart racing at the thought that it might be Dylan. But it was just another collection agency, reminding her of an unpaid bill. She sank back into the couch, defeated. Her mind wandered to the life she once had. The luxurious vacations, the elegant parties, the admiration of friends and family. She had traded it all for fleeting moments of passion with Steve, and now she was paying the price. In desperation, Alana decided to make one last attempt. She wrote Dylan a letter, pouring out everything she had kept bottled up for years. Dylan, I don't even know where to begin. I've spent 5 years living with the weight of my actions, and there hasn't been a day that I haven't regretted what I did to you. I destroyed our family. I betrayed your trust, and I've lost everything because of it. Steve is gone. The kids hate me, and I can't blame them. I deserve their anger, and I deserve yours too. But I need you to know that I am sorry. Not just for what I did, but for the pain I caused you. If there's any part of you that can forgive me, please let me know. Even if you never want to see me again, just let me know that you're okay. That's all I ask. She mailed the letter, though she had no idea if it would even reach him. Days turned into weeks, but no response came. Deep down, she knew there wouldn't be one. Elena's life continued to spiral. The apartment went into foreclosure, forcing her to move into a cramped one-bedroom unit on the outskirts of the city. The loneliness was suffocating, and the realization that she had brought this upon herself was a bitter pill to swallow. One rainy evening, as she sat by the window watching the world go by, she whispered to herself, "This is my punishment, and I deserve it." But even as she accepted her suffering, a small part of her still clung to the hope that one day she might find redemption, even if it meant spending the rest of her life trying to earn it. Ilana sat in her dim apartment, scrolling aimlessly through social media. Her days blurred with regret and longing, and her nights were filled with haunting dreams of the life she had lost. As she refreshed her feed, a photo popped up that made her breath catch. It was Dylan, standing on a pier, the setting sun behind him, his arm around a smiling woman. The caption read, "Grateful for new beginnings and unexpected love." The photo was shared by a local seaside page, tagged with the town's location, a coastal village less than 2 hours from where she lived. Alana's heart raced as she stared at the image. He looked so different, so happy, so free. It wasn't just the new hairstyle or the tan from the sun. It was the way he carried himself. He looked like a man unburdened. The woman beside him, Alana's stomach twisted as she studied her, was beautiful, yes, but not in an extravagant or polished way. She had a natural warmth, and her smile radiated ease, something Alana had never felt herself. Ilana's fingers trembled as she grabbed her phone and called Chloe. "I found him!" she blurted out, her voice shaking. "I found Dad!" "Found who?" Chloe's voice was cold. "Your father," Ilana said, her voice breaking. "He's living in some seaside town. He looks different. He looks happy." Chloe sighed heavily. "Mom, leave him alone." "I need to talk to him, Chloe. I need to fix this." "You need to let him go," Chloe interrupted sharply. "He doesn't want to see you. He made that clear. But what about you and Ethan? Don't you want him back in your lives?" Elena's voice cracked. "We're doing fine without him," Chloe snapped. "Unlike you, we've learned to move on." The call ended abruptly, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts. But Chloe's words didn't discourage her. They only strengthened her resolve. The drive to the seaside town felt torturous. Rain lashed against the windshield as Ilana gripped the steering wheel, her mind racing with rehearsed apologies and desperate pleas. Memories of her betrayal flashed before her. Steve's smug grin, Dylan's devastated face, the children's accusatory glares. She had ruined everything, but she clung to the fragile hope that Dylan might still have room in his heart for forgiveness. The rain eased as she arrived in the small, picturesque town. The smell of salt water filled the air as Elena parked her car near the pier. The photo from earlier guided her steps, leading her to a quaint little bookstore. Inside, she found him. Dylan was behind the counter, talking to a customer. His hair was shorter now, flecked with gray, but his posture was relaxed, his laugh, something she hadn't heard in years, light and genuine. For a moment, Alana froze. She hadn't prepared for this, seeing him so content. The customer left, and Dylan turned to the shelves, sorting books. Gathering her courage, Alana stepped forward. "Dylan!" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. He froze. With his hands hovering over the books, Dylan slowly turned around. His eyes widened for a brief moment as recognition hit him, but his expression quickly hardened into something unreadable. "Elena," he said evenly, "what are you doing here?" The calmness in his voice caught Elena off guard. She had expected anger, perhaps even tears, but not this detached indifference. I saw the picture," she stammered. "I had to come." Dylan crossed his arms, his gaze unwavering. "Why?" Alana swallowed hard. "I needed to see you, to explain, to apologize. I've been trying to reach you for years," Dylan interrupted, his tone cutting. "And I've been ignoring you for years." Tears welled in Alana's eyes as she stepped closer. "Please, Dylan, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't live like this anymore. I've lost everything." "That's not my problem," Dylan said sharply. Ilana flinched at the coldness in his voice. "The kids, they miss you. They need you. I need you," she implored. Dylan let out a bitter laugh. "The kids? The same kids who called me a loser dad? The ones who knew the truth and still lied to my face? No, Ilana, they don't need me, and you certainly don't." Ilana collapsed to her knees, her sobs breaking through her composure. "Please, Dylan, I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but we were together for 25 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" Dylan stared at her for a long moment before responding. "It meant everything to me, and you destroyed it." Elena's sobs grew louder. "I was selfish, I know that, but I loved you. Dylan, I still love you." "Don't." Dylan's voice was low and firm. "Don't you dare say that. You didn't love me. You loved what I could give you. The house, the vacations, the money. And when that wasn't enough, you turned to Steve." Alana shook her head frantically. "No, it wasn't like that. It was a mistake." Dylan snapped. "You don't accidentally cheat on someone for years." The door to the bookstore creaked open, and Lainey stepped inside, holding a basket of groceries. She stopped when she saw Elena on the floor and Dylan standing rigidly behind the counter. "Everything okay?" Lainey asked, her voice calm but cautious. Dylan turned toward her, his expression softening instantly. "Just someone I used to know." Alana's eyes darted between them. "Is this her? The woman from the photo?" Lainey stepped closer, her hand resting gently on Dylan's arm. "I'm Lainey," she said simply. Alana's heart sank as she watched the way Dylan looked at Lainey, with trust, admiration, and a quiet kind of love that Alana had never been able to offer him. "Dylan, please," Elena begged, her voice cracking. "Just give me a chance to make things right." Dylan shook his head. "There's nothing to make right. You made your choices, Alana. You and Steve. I gave you everything, and you threw it away. I spent years rebuilding my life, and I'm not going to let you drag me back into that misery." Lainey squeezed his arm gently. "I'll give you two a moment," she said, before stepping outside. Dylan waited until the door closed, then spoke again. "This is the last time we're having this conversation, Elena. You need to let go. Whatever you have left, focus on it, because I've moved on." Alana wiped her tears, desperation giving way to anger. "You can't just erase 25 years, Dylan." "I didn't erase it," Dylan replied calmly. "You did." He stepped around the counter and opened the door. "Goodbye, Elena." She stood there, her chest heaving, but deep down she knew it was over. Slowly she rose to her feet and walked out. As the door closed behind her, Alana stood on the sidewalk, feeling the weight of finality pressed down on her. She glanced back through the window and saw Dylan laughing with Lainey. The life she had destroyed was now his to rebuild, with someone else. Alana drove back to the city in silence. Her mind replayed the confrontation with Dylan, and his words echoed in her head like a gavel striking repeatedly. "You made your choices, Elena." The truth of it stung. She had spent years trying to reach him, holding on to the hope that somehow she could undo the damage. But now she understood. Dylan was truly gone, and she had to face the life she had created for herself. The city greeted her with its usual indifference, gray skies, honking horns, and the cold rush of people in a hurry. Her apartment was no longer the grand estate she once enjoyed, but a cramped one-bedroom unit in a rundown building. The peeling wallpaper and faint smell of mildew served as a constant reminder of how far she had fallen. Alana sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the pile of unopened bills on the coffee table. Her eyes shifted to the few photos she had left of her family. Dylan holding Chloe as a baby, Ethan grinning after his first soccer game, and her in the center, radiant and seemingly happy. The sight filled her with equal parts pain and determination. That night, Elena made a decision. If she couldn't fix the past, she would at least try to be better for the future, for herself and for the world she had ignored in her pursuit of material comforts. The next morning, Ilana walked into the nearest community center and asked to speak with someone in charge. The coordinator, a kindly woman in her 50s named Margie, raised an eyebrow when Elena explained why she was there. "So you're looking to volunteer?" Margie asked. "Yes," Elena replied, nervously fidgeting with her hands. I need to do something meaningful. Something to make up for mistakes I've made." Margie leaned back in her chair, studying Elena carefully. "We can always use an extra pair of hands, food drives, shelters, outreach programs. But I'll warn you, it's hard work. No glamour, no recognition. Are you ready for that?" Ilana nodded firmly. "I'm ready." And so began Ilana's journey toward redemption. At first, the work was grueling. She spent long hours sorting donations, packing food boxes, and cleaning shelter facilities. The physical toll was nothing compared to the emotional weight of hearing the stories of those she was helping. Homeless mothers struggling to feed their children, veterans abandoned by the system, young people trying to escape the grip of addiction. One night, while serving meals at a soup kitchen, Ilana found herself talking to a woman named Teresa, who had 2 young boys with her. Teresa's story was all too familiar: broken marriage, financial ruin, and betrayal from someone she had once trusted. "I didn't see it coming," Teresa said, her voice trembling as she spooned mashed potatoes onto her plate. "One day, everything was fine, and the next, he was gone. Took everything we had." Ilana swallowed hard. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. Teresa gave her a small, weary smile. "It's hard, but I've got my boys. They keep me going. You can't dwell on the past, you know? You just have to keep moving forward." The word struck a chord with Elena. She thought of Chloe and Ethan, now distant and estranged. Maybe it wasn't too late to reconnect with them, even if it was only to apologize for the pain she had caused. Meanwhile, in the seaside town, Dylan's life was blossoming. His relationship with Lainey had grown into something he never thought he'd experience again: partnership built on trust and mutual respect. One evening, as they walked along on the beach, Lainey gently slipped her hand into Dylan's. "You seem lighter these days," she said with a smile. Dylan glanced at her, feeling his heart fill with emotion. "I think I've finally let go of all the anger," he said, his voice steady. "For a long time, it felt like it was the only thing driving me forward. But now—" He looked out at the ocean, watching the waves gently crash against the shore. "Now, I don't need it anymore." Lainey squeezed his hand. "You've come a long way, Dylan. I'm proud of you." Her words meant more to him than she could ever understand. For years, he had felt broken, defined by betrayal and loss. But Lainey had helped him realize that he was more than his past, that he could rebuild a life filled with love and meaning. Together, they opened a small bookstore in the town, where Dylan spent his days, surrounded by stories and people who shared his passion for books. Lainey started a community art program, bringing people together through creativity. Their lives became deeply woven into the fabric of the town, and they found joy in the small things: shared meals, quiet evenings, and the laughter of neighbors who had become close friends. Meanwhile, back in the city, Ilana continued her work at the community center, slowly rebuilding her sense of self-worth. One day, she received a call from Chloe. "Mom," Chloe began, her voice hesitant, "I heard you've been volunteering. Is that true?" Ilana's heart leapt at the sound of her daughter's voice. "Yes, it is," she replied carefully. "I've been trying to do something good with my life. Something that matters." There was a long pause before Chloe spoke again. "I'm glad," she said softly. "I hope you're serious about it." "I am," Elena said earnestly. "I know I've made a lot of mistakes, Chloe, more than I can ever make up for, but I want to try. I want to be someone you and Ethan can be proud of." Chloe's voice softened. "It's going to take time, Mom, but I appreciate that you're trying." The call ended, but for Ilana, it was a small step forward. A glimmer of hope that, one day, she might heal the fractured relationships with her children. As the months turned to years, Elena found herself changing in ways she hadn't expected. The work at the shelters and food drives became more than just an act of redemption. It became her purpose. She no longer focused on what she had lost, but rather on what she could give. One evening, as she walked home from the shelter, light rain began to fall. She tilted her head back, letting the drops wash over her face. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. Not because she had been forgiven, but because she had finally forgiven herself. In the seaside town, Dylan sat on the porch of his small home, Lainey by his side. They watched the sunset in peaceful silence, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. "Do you ever think about the past?" Lainey asked softly. "Sometimes," Dylan admitted, "but not like I used to. Now, it's more of a reminder of how far I've come." Lainey smiled. "And where you're going?" Dylan took her hand, his grip firm and steady. "Yeah, and where I'm going." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Dylan felt a quiet satisfaction. Life wasn't perfect, but it was his. A life he had rebuilt with strength, resilience, and love. The sunlight filtered through the windows of Dylan's seaside home as he sat on the porch sipping his morning coffee. Lainey was out tending to the small garden they had cultivated together, her laughter carried by the gentle breeze as she chatted with their neighbor. Life had finally settled into a comforting rhythm. One afternoon, while clearing out an old storage box, Dylan stumbled across a sealed envelope he didn't recognize. The paper was yellowed, and the handwriting on the front was unmistakably Steve's. His breath caught as he stared at the name scrawled across the envelope. Dylan hesitated. For years, Steve's name had been a bitter reminder of betrayal and deceit. The urge to throw the letter into the fire was overwhelming, but something stopped him. His fingers trembled as he broke the seal and unfolded the paper. The letter began simply, "Dylan, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. There are things I need to confess, things I should have told you a long time ago. I owe you the truth, even if it comes too late." Dylan's stomach twisted as he read on. "I lied to you about the children, about Elena, about everything. You were always the better man, Dylan. You worked hard and built a life for your family, and I envied you for it. Ilana and I started out as something stupid. She was lonely, I was jealous, and I saw an opportunity. But it wasn't love, not for her, and definitely not for me. It was my way of taking something from you, of bringing you down to my level. The worst thing I ever did was tell her to make you believe the kids weren't yours. I planted that seed because I knew it would destroy you. But here's the truth. Chloe and Ethan are your children, Dylan. They've always been yours. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope you can find peace with this truth. I'm sorry. Steve." Dylan's hand shook as he lowered the letter, his vision blurred. His heart pounded in his chest. For years, he had lived under the crushing belief that his children weren't his, that his whole life had been a lie. And now, this. The air felt heavy, suffocating. He stood abruptly, needing to move, needing to breathe. Lainey, sensing something was wrong, appeared at the door. "Dylan?" she asked, concern etched on her face. "I need a moment," he said, brushing past her and heading toward the beach. The waves crashed against the shore as Dylan paced along the sand. The letter crumpled in his fist. Memories flooded his mind. Chloe's first steps, Ethan's graduation, the family vacations that now felt so tainted. All those years, he had distanced himself from them, believing they were never truly his, all because of Steve's venomous jealousy. Anger rose in him like a tide. Anger at Steve, at Elena, and even at himself for believing the lie. But beneath the anger was something deeper. Regret. He had cut ties with his children, disinherited them, and vanished from their lives. How could he begin to fix what had been broken? Later that evening, Lainey found him sitting on the porch, the letter resting on the table beside him. She sat down quietly, waiting for him to speak. "It's from Steve," he finally said, his voice heavy. "He admitted he lied about the kids." Lainey's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "They're mine," Dylan said, the words feeling strange on his tongue. "Chloe and Ethan, they were always mine." Lainey placed a comforting hand on his arm. "What are you going to do?" Dylan sighed, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "I need to tell them. I need to try to make things right. Reaching out to Chloe and Ethan wasn't easy. Years of silence had built walls between them, and Dylan wasn't sure they would even be willing to hear him out. But he knew he had to try. He started with Chloe, sending a simple email. Chloe, I know it's been a long time, and I don't expect forgiveness. But there's something you need to know, something I should have known all along. If you're willing, I'd like to talk. Dad. The response came 2 days later. Dad, I'm not sure what there is to talk about, but I'm willing to listen. Let me know when and where. Chloe. They met at a small cafe in the city. Dylan arrived early, his nerves fraying when Chloe walked in. He barely recognized her. She was no longer the rebellious teenager he remembered, but a confident young woman with an air of independence. Hi, she said, sitting across from him. Hi, Dylan replied, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for coming. Chloe shrugged, her expression guarded. What's this about? Dylan took a deep breath and slid the letter across the table. It's from Steve. I think you should read it. Chloe hesitated before picking up the letter. As she read, her face shifted from confusion to shock to anger. When she finished, she looked up at Dylan, tears brimming in her eyes. So it was all a lie? She asked, her voice trembling. You thought we weren't yours because of this? Dylan nodded, guilt weighing heavily on him. I believed it, and I let it ruin everything. I'm so sorry, Chloe, for everything. Chloe stared at him for a long moment before leaning back in her chair. You should have talked to us, Dad. We didn't understand why you left, why you shut us out. It hurt a lot. I know, Dylan said, his voice breaking. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you, if you'll let me. Chloe wiped her eyes and nodded slowly. I think I'd like that. Reconnecting with Ethan proved more difficult. He was colder, more distant, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. You left us, Ethan said bluntly when they finally met. You didn't even give us a chance. I know, Dylan admitted. I was wrong. I let my pain blind me, and I made choices I'll regret for the rest of my life. But you're my son, Ethan, and I want to make things right. Ethan crossed his arms, his jaw tight. It's not that simple. I don't expect it to be, Dylan said, his voice steady. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Ethan didn't respond immediately, but the faintest flicker of understanding passed through his eyes. We'll see, he said finally. Over time, Dylan began to rebuild his relationship with his children. It wasn't easy. Years of hurt and mistrust didn't vanish overnight. But there were small victories. A shared dinner with Chloe. A conversation about sports with Ethan. Slowly, the walls began to come down. For Dylan, the process was both painful and healing. He couldn't undo the past, but he could try to build a future. And as he watched Chloe and Ethan begin to let him back into their lives, he felt a sense of hope he hadn't known in years. One evening, as Dylan and Lainey sat on their porch, he shared the story of Steve's letter and his journey to reconnect with his children. You've come a long way, Lainey said, her eyes filled with pride. I couldn't have done it without you, he replied, taking her hand. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Dylan felt a quiet sense of peace. Life had taken him down unexpected paths, filled with pain and betrayal, but also redemption and love. And in the end, he had found his way back to what truly mattered.